My name's Adam Wadewitz. I'm Chief Winemaker. I'm here with founder Martin Shaw.
Welcome everybody. Nice to have you here, and a pleasure to talk to you about the single vineyard concept and the wines.
So we are releasing 3 new wines today, and some of you may have already purchased them as part of the wine club, or some of you may have tasted them at the cellar door. We have 2 wines from 2018, which come from our Lenswood Vineyard, so Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir, and we also have a wine that comes from the vineyard just behind the winery here, from the 17 vintage, the Balhannah Shiraz. So those 3 wines are being released. But before we kick off, I think probably good to get Martin's thoughts on single vineyards and as a concept and as a group, you know, why we've kind of seen the importance of single vineyards.
Yeah, look, I think that you probably noticed there are a number of companies who are sort of having gone down or going down the single vineyard route. And in our case, it's really about the expression of site. It's nothing to do with a reserve wine concept or a bigger or a more alcoholic or an oakier or a whatever wine. It's about identifying what we think are great single sites and then looking how those wines age over time.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think for us, you know, looking for great sites and then having the season overlay is just a wonderful part of the journey of wine. And I think, you know, for us, it really gets back to understanding great sites and seeing their expression. And one of the things we're going to look at today is a chance to go back and see some older vintages next to the newer vintages. And I think there will be some opportunities, particularly with the 13 Balhannah Shiraz to purchase some of that. So keep your eye out for that. So yeah, I guess let's start with Lenswood and Chardonnay. Maybe if you want to talk a little bit about Chardonnay in general and then why we think Lenswood is a great place for Chardonnay.
Well, I think Chardonnay is it's the most exciting white variety, and partly because it's a real winemaker's wine, isn't it? You know, I mean, there you have varieties like Riesling and like Sauvignon that are really all about the quality of the fruit. Chardonnay, there is no doubt, fruit quality is paramount, but it is a wine as a winemaker that we love to tinker with because it needs moulding, be it with oak, be it with handling, be it with malolactic fermentation, and it's the most complex, the most rewarding white wine. Lenswood as a site, Lenswood Vineyard is a vineyard that we purchased in 2012.
Well, correct.
And it was an established vineyard. It was planted in the late 90s. And I'd had my eye on it for a number of years, as you know.
Yeah.
It went through 2 owners, and then in the end, we started buying the fruit and managed to persuade them to sell it to us. So it's in a terrific site. It's very hilly. It's got a number of different aspects, a lot of east-facing slopes. It's high, it's cool, and it's just a great place to grow Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful site, and you know, I remember you saying to me early on when I first arrived in 2013 that you'd spoken to Ray Guerin, you know, who's obviously one of Australia's leading lights in viticulture, and particularly in cool climates. And you'd asked him about if you could choose a site, which site would you choose in the Adelaide Hills, and he pointed pretty swiftly to the Lenswood property. And I think, you know, we've come to really understand that a lot more deeper since buying the property. And I guess a lot of the work, you know, post Ray Guerin being here and Murray Leake being here, we've put that work into the vineyard to not only understand it, but to grow better grapes and get that better expression.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because whilst the bones of Lenswood, the site, the soil, all of that are good, and the vineyard was very well established, I think the work that we've done, or Ray and Murray in particular have done, which is everything from doubling the vine density, changing the pruning regime, the irrigation regime, all of that, has made it an outstanding vineyard. And I think that it's very worthy of a single site vineyard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. When you find a great place and then you put that effort in to get the most out of it, that's when you see you run into the right season and something sort of amazing can happen. We have got a few people on the other end of the screen, so we're not just sitting here talking into the ether as they may feel, but we've got a request that we need to remind you to ask questions through the Q&A function, not the chat function. So if you do have any questions, if you can ask them through the Q&A, then that would be the way to go. So we've got 2 Chardonnays, probably worth looking at these to start with. The 2014, which was the first Chardonnay that we made for a single vineyard, and then the current release, which is the 17. So do you want to kick off with the 14 and sorry, 18 and I said 17?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you're the one, Adam, given that these are your babies. You're the one who should be talking to the wines. But do you want me to hold this up and you can tell us where they come from?
Yeah. So I think I'll just move these bottles out of the way. I think it's always fun to get a map on these things, and so this is the Lenswood property. This is sort of east facing. We have a number of different. This is south facing here, but we found that this little patch, which is an east facing, it's on the western side of the vineyard, is really a lovely spot. It's got great drainage. The soil is magnificent. It's a very even slope, and it gets the morning sun, misses out on the afternoon sun. And predominantly, the single vineyard wines come from this area. And we're not really worried about the clones in which it comes from. We're really worried about the evenness of that bit of dirt, and we're looking for fruit that's ripening all at the same time. So that's, after understanding the vineyard for a little while, the 14 vintage turned out a remarkable wine from this part of the vineyard, and that's what we're looking here at the 2014 vintage, so which is exciting.
So to winemaking, Adam, I just want to clarify, I suppose, the single vineyard concept, because some of you people will remember the days of reserve wines and that sort of thing, and the mentality seemed to be that a reserve wine was more expensive, therefore it needed to be riper, it needed to be oakier, it needed to be all of those things. And that's certainly not what we're looking for here, is it? So in terms of, we're making a wine which is an expression of that site, as opposed to something that is, vinified in a vastly different way or structurally very different from our M3, for example.
Yeah, you're right, and that's the aim, is to make these wines that really speak of the place. And I think for us, how do you do that? First of all, you find the best part of the vineyard, and the best part for us as a group has not been about the loudest parcel, but it's about something that has a unique character. And one of the things that we see from this part of the vineyard is this lovely white flowers, and it's always had that delicate Chardonnay, beautiful acidity, but this tension, white flowers, and just this crystalline palate that really sets it apart from other wines in the hills, and one that's not yelling at you, but if it has a lot of subtlety. So with that in mind, when we make the wine, it's all 100% hand harvested. It's brought into the winery, and from there we whole bunch press, as we do with all the grapes that go into M3. But from that step there, we put it into large format oak, and the idea is bigger barrels, 500 litre barrels, will allow the wine to have a chance to put the vineyard at the front. So it's not clouded by oak. It's sort of supported by oak. We like it to ferment in barrels, but we don't want that to be an overriding character. So it'll be 30% new, and really from there the wine sits, and we'll make a few decisions around stirring and the time that it comes out. But from there, the wine is kind of defined by by its maturity in barrel.
So the 18, which is the wine that's just been released, tell us about the vintage.
Yeah, so 18 was a vintage that really suited Chardonnay. In my mind, it was warm but without being hot. We had wines that have this deliciousness that flow through them, and probably quite different to the 14, which 14 was, as you remember, was very cold and super cool finish and low yielding. So we see, that the wine, although it looks like the Vineyard in both glasses, you can definitely see that the season is quite different.
Absolutely. One of the expectations with these wines, be they the Chardonnay, the Pinot or the Shiraz, is that they will age well. And I think what we're seeing with the Chardonnays we're talking about now is they do have a terrific ability to age. And that's important. If people are buying wines of this calibre, they want to know that they can drink them young or they can drink them as 10-year-old wines. And I reckon that 18 is going to age beautifully. It's just subtle. It's got all the hallmarks of a wine that will age, that natural acidity, and I think it's a cracker.
Yeah, I think you get the best of both worlds with 18 and Chardonnay. I think you have a little bit of opulence from the warm season, but from the high altitude of Lenswood, you're actually capturing this lovely acidity as well. And I think for me that really delivers on those promises that we talked about. So the ability to be able to drink it young, but also age it in your cellars and have that confidence that it's going to be an interesting drink and a lovely drink in years to come. And you can see by the 14 and the way that wine's held up beautifully is a really nice point to that in the future. So I think as Chardonnay in Australia, there's no more exciting kind of space, and I think as we go along with the advent of screw cap, and it's exciting to have great Chardonnay in your cellar because you will be rewarded.
Just on that, it's really interesting to note that we drink a lot of great Chardonnays from around the world amongst ourselves, and we often line them up side by side. And the interesting thing is that wines like, not just our wines, but the better Australian Chardonnays, and even the expensive better Australian Chardonnays really hold their own against any of those better Grand Cru Burgundies, certainly Grand Cru Chablis, and it just goes to show that how well we're doing as a Chardonnay producing country.
It's an exciting space, and it is a great thing for Chardonnay and for Chardonnay lovers that you do see these different expressions across Australia in different regions, and you can name them Tasmania, you can name Yarra Valley, Western Australia. You've got some fantastic wines from the hills. You've got it's a really exciting space, and certainly for me, it's a variety that can be malleable enough to show these great places and the great seasons really well. And as you say, it's a pretty well known fact that we're sort of battling it out on the world front for the next peg. So it's been really great space.
Good.
Which brings us to Pinot. So Pinot for us has been, I guess, a really fun challenge and a really exciting challenge. We've got a question up there too, which we'll get to. Martin, do you want to talk a little bit about Pinot, and then I'll jump into the Lenswood stuff?
Yeah, look, let me start with pre-Adam days, pre-David days. Michael Hill-Smith and I, have drunk a lot of great Pinot. We love Pinot. I think if you said to me, what's the greatest red wine you've ever drunk, it would be a Pinot, a Burgundy. So when we started, when we bought the Balhannah property, we were very keen to have a red hot go at Pinot. And we planted Pinot on this site. And look, it matured, and we planted the right clones, and we grew it well. And we made pretty nice wines. But were they really exciting? No. As it turned out, this is a fabulous, particularly this hill that is behind us, is a fabulous Shiraz site. So, you know, a decade later, we decided to pull that Pinot out, replace it with Shiraz, and that sort of coincided with the acquisition of the Lenswood Vineyard, which is 100 metres higher. It ripens about a week to 10 days later.
Yeah.
That might not seem a lot, but in the scheme of Pinot Noir, for example, it makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
So yeah. we reckon that the Lenswood site is a fabulous place to grow Pinot, and I think that, so we kind of started again, didn't we? Once we had Lenswood, and then the process of increasing vine density, changing clones, the investment in all our red wine processing equipment has meant that really probably the last 5 years is when our Pinot making has got exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Pinot, as we know, is just one of those varieties that you just cannot underestimate, and you can't cheat one sense of it. So you need to grow it in the right place. You need to grow it well. You need to have that commitment to making it really well and understanding what its great characters are. And I think, you know, we've in the last, you know, sort of, you know, four to 6 years, it's been a really exciting space for us. And I think we've just shown such commitment to getting Pinot Noir right and Lenswood. We think as a group that in the Adelaide Hills, there's small areas that Pinot can really work, and there's lots of areas where Pinot is not going to work. And we think Lenswood for us is a really exciting place to grow Pinot. So it's great to have a couple of wines here to look at. Before I jump in and talk specifically about the wines, there has been a question up there, Martin, which I want to throw to you. I know everyone is different, but this is from Tyson. In both your preferences, are they on single or multiple vineyards? But what is your preference, single or multiple vineyards?
Good question, Tyson. And let me just, without ducking it, let me say, for example, Shaw & Smith Sauvignon Blanc comes from a number of different vineyard sites, and in my opinion, the blend is better than any of the single sites. And I think, you know, whilst we have some really good parcels that might show some of the more herbaceous characters, others, the blend is a better wine than any single component. That's not the case necessarily with Chardonnay or Shiraz or Pinot, because I think if you have an outstanding site, it's more authentic, you know, because it is an expression of that site. And if you look at the great vineyards around the world, you know, let's go to Burgundy. La Tâche is about the site. Mm-hmm. It's about the dirt under that 5 hectares.
And seeing that vineyard every year with different vintage conditions, but knowing that and that unique character, that unique DNA that comes from that one site.
And look, I mean, I think, for example, if you were to look at Hill of Grace, single vineyard Shiraz versus Grange, they're two extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily collectible, great quality wines. One is all about a single site.
Yeah.
And because of that, you'll see more variations due to vintage, due to all sorts of factors, whereas Grange is a mixture of sites, and therefore there is more consistency there. Mm. So it's a safer bet, a multi-site blend.
Yeah. So which do you prefer?
I think I prefer the
purity
of a single site.
Yeah, I think I'm much the same. And there is always a place for blends, but I think when you get to know a place and you get to feel what it's about, then that single purity is a really important question. There is another question up here regarding clonal selection on Chardonnay at Lenswood, and is there a mix? Do we trial new different clones, and what performs best in the hills? And the question also relates to Pinot. So clones, I guess just to touch on clones in general, we feel like site is the most important thing. We feel like site is bigger than clones, but we do feel like if you get site and clones working together, then that's when you get the best out of the site. So we probably prefer more clones rather than less clones, and we do have some clones that suit some places better than other clones. But I think in general we prefer a mix of clones because we feel like that gives us a different expression and a better, more authentic expression. But
particularly with Pinot, I think, you know, you often see a Chardonnay that might be from a single clone that can be more exciting than a single clone Pinot. And I think because Pinot is just that much more challenging, it does benefit from the blending of the
complexity of
different clones.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Interesting on that though, as you'll know, when we were in Burgundy a couple of years ago, back in the 80s, the Burgundians were very much into clones, and they've now swung back away from clones, back to more sort of vineyard selection. So they'll go out and they'll choose the vines that are producing the best wine, and they will go what they call selection massal or mass selection as a preferred option than a single clone.
Yeah, that's right. And I think for us too, you know, understanding that Pinot is it is prone to mutation, and looking for those great expressions is following that and seeing what you've got on your own site is important. So this Pinot Noir comes predominantly from Block 1, really, which is south-facing slope. You can see it up the top here. And,
predominantly 114 clone, which is a Dijon clone.
That's right, and we do really love this bit of dirt. It tends to have slightly more brown loam on the top, and we find that it during the growing season it'll often have grass growing through the mid-row, and we feel that kind of sustains a lot more evenness through the vineyard. And we've done a lot of work there, and it's a wine that has real completeness to it. And I think when we're looking for Pinot Noir expression, we are looking for completeness. But I think one of the the surprising things for me when coming here is that, you know, when you do find these cooler sites within the Adelaide Hills, they are the wines that you make from Pinot Noir sites are delicate. They are pure, and they do need to be coaxed into giving their best. And I think, you know, hopefully we've done a job with these wines, and we're really excited to get them out. But the way that we do that is the wines are the grapes are hand harvested. They're all hand sorted, so they go across the sorting table. From there, we use not much whole fruit, so a lot more destemmed fruit goes into our Lenswood vineyard, and we find because the wine is delicate and already savoury, we are trying to capture a bit more density from that site, and that's something that we've learnt over time. And then from there, it's into puncheons, so 500 litre puncheons, and that we find is a very gentle way of preserving that freshness and catching what's there. So I should have mentioned open fermented and hand long ferments. Yeah, so from anything from sort of 15 to 30 days, depending on what we've got and what's happening with the wine and what sort of extraction levels we're seeing in the season. And then, we've been really excited about, you know, not only wines that we see in front of us today, but also where we've gone in future vintages as well. So exciting time for Pinot, and we've had a great response to the new release of the 18 Lenswood. So hopefully you guys get a chance to have a look at that.
Adam, just before we finish up on the Pinots, talk to us a bit about the single sites, all of these, and what we're doing in regard to soil and organics, and the move away from move to organic.
Yeah, I think what's been really fascinating is the work that we've been putting into vineyards in general. And sometimes we've talked about this and we've joked that sometimes it's easier to talk about what we haven't done to improve than what we have, because we've done everything, and that's from everything from looking at our canopies and making sure that you know that our cordons are facing away from the sun. We don't like burnt fruit, so that's something that we consider. When we do set these vines up, we often get them back onto canes. Cane selection and vine health is right up there, and sap flow and pruning is something that we really consider for the health of the vine. From there, we think about the area directly under the vine, which is where the roots are. We see that as the stomach of the vine, and what we want to promote is really healthy growth and great diversity, and that's something that Murray Leake and Chris and the team have been working really hard on. And that move towards organics has been a huge step, and we feel like the soils are alive, and we're seeing that really transform into the wine. So that's been happening across both Balhannah and Lenswood, and we've seen a really lovely progression there, and we're excited about the future.
So the 18 Lenswood, in my view, I mentioned that our journey into Pinot is really, and the last 5 years has taken massive leaps and bounds, but I think this 18 is just it's the strongest yet by a reasonable margin. Do you agree?
No, I agree. I think again, it's that combination of the work that you put in, the understanding about working with a single site, and then running into the season that suits the variety. And I think for us, that's been a really lucky / hard work situation, and yeah, I think it's really pleasing to see how far we've come with Pinot, and I look forward to the future.
This wine to me has got real structure. It's got terrific tannin. It's got terrific savoury notes. To make a pretty simple Pinot, it's not that challenging. But to actually fill it out and make a wine that really will stand the test of time is a much bigger ask, and I think you've done a great job with that one.
Yeah, thank you. It's an exciting little step for us there, and we look forward to the future on that side. It's again, you can't replace the learning that happens there, and I think that sets us up well for the future.
The other interesting thing with Pinot is because they tend to be lighter coloured and medium, light to medium bodied, a lot of people assume that they don't age very well. Nothing could be further from the truth.
No, exactly. And one of the things that we talk about as these wines age is, don't worry about the colour. That's not something you think about, but look at the wine in the glass. And the wines always have, such interesting, complex elements, and Adelaide Hills in general, I think, heads naturally towards a sort of forest floor regional character, which I love because it gives this, complexity to the wine. And if you have a wine that already starts with great structure and great intensity and a lovely, reflection of its site, then you throw in that complexity of the region, and that regionality, I think, is it's set up for a really good time. And we find that these wines, and you know this better than anyone, that they look like they're aging a bit, and then they'll stay at that level, and that's what's fascinating over time, to see those wines age.
Yeah, we've all tasted great Burgundies that you think this wine might be 10 or 15 years old, but it's actually 30 or 40 years old. If they're made well, they age beautifully.
Yeah.
I think the last word for me on Pinot before we move is that, again, as a winemaker, as a person who grows grapes and makes wine, the thing that is so rewarding about these is there's nowhere to hide, is there? You can't cut any corners anywhere along the process and try and make good wine. Plenty of other varieties are much more forgiving, and there is no forgiveness from Pinot Noir.
No, and I think it's a beautiful variety for that reason. And I think it also too, it keeps you challenged, and you never feel like you've ever, you sort of you've caught it for a little bit and then it slips through your fingers again. And I think it's that sort of variety that you're chasing. And as you say, you cannot fake any one bit of it, and that commitment really gets you closer to unlocking what the really goodness about those sites.
So for anyone out there who's wondering why there isn't much good inexpensive Pinot Noir out there, there's your answer, because it's good inexpensive Pinot Noir doesn't exist. So,
no, exactly, I agree.
So you want to have a look at the
Shiraz, yeah. So this brings us to Balhannah, which is where we are at the moment. We're sitting down here in the winery. So this site is it's a wonderful site. It's around 380, 400 metres in elevation, and it's really in the middle part of the valley, or the middle part of the Adelaide Hills. And we think it was probably determined to be too cool for Shiraz at one point, but we think it really lends itself to a style of Shiraz that we love. This hill here, which is facing north, has a large amount of ironstone and quartz through it, but a lot of ironstone. And we've seen a great relationship with sites rich in ironstone and the growing of Shiraz. And we are excited. It's the first single vineyard that we made, the 2013, and we've actually opened a bottle here to remind ourselves why we did. But it comes from Block 2, which is close planted. It's a 0.75 between the vines, so really asking each vine to only do a little bit to get to ripeness, and we just love the natural fragrance that you get from the site. It's medium bodied, it's spicy, and that's the beauty of Balhannah Shiraz. And ageability again is part of that criteria that Martin mentioned about Chardonnay, and I think that certainly lends itself to Adelaide Hills Shiraz and particularly Balhannah.
This map is slightly outdated. I mentioned earlier that we planted Pinot Noir at this site, which is those blocks there. They've since been ripped out and are now planted with Shiraz. So this whole north-facing ironstone site is planted with high density, 5,500 vines per hectare, Shiraz of some of the more interesting clients. 5 different clients, yeah, which is fascinating, and will be really a fascinating project for us to watch into the future. We've got the 17, which is the release, and we've also got the 13, which is hopefully you all got that at home too, and are enjoying to have a look. Do you want to talk a little bit about Shiraz and the history of Shiraz at Shaw & Smith? Sure. Look, I think Adam mentioned that about its suitability to the hills, and I confess I've been making wine here for a little while now, probably 40 years, and early on I thought that this region was going to be too cool to ripen Shiraz on a consistent basis. I still happen to believe that's the case with Cabernet in a lot of cases, but when we first built the winery in 2000, we made a small parcel of Shiraz for someone else from an area in the southern part of the hills at Macclesfield, and the wine was really exciting. It was full of the pepper spice characters that you see in Northern Rhone. It was medium bodied, but it ripened beautifully, and so we thought, boy, sometimes it's nice to be proven wrong. So we then got on our horse and set about buying, planting Shiraz, and we started our Shiraz project in 2002 was the first vintage, and I think 13, which was Adam's first vintage, was a fair change in style, because that's when we invested heavily in the open fermenters, the sorting tables, the destemmers, gave us the ability to do things like whole bunch, whole berry, the oak regime changed a bit, but whilst it's far more forgiving than Pinot Noir, it's still, when you grow Shiraz in a place like the Adelaide Hills, you can't be complacent. You know, I think if you look like overcropping it, if you're in the wrong site, then the wine will look like it.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that we have come to love is you know, what we do best in terms of Shiraz, and I think, you know, as Martin sort of suggested, that if you grow it well, and again that gets back to having the right, you know, crop per vine, and you know, farming this vineyard really well, and you know, we barely need to water these vines. They live a healthy life, and the soils are really nourished, and even though it's a quite a challenging site to grow, when you do support them with good organic practices, then the vine can be as healthy as what it can be. And we find that that allows, having a low yield and a healthy vine allows you to pick these grapes when they're absolutely at the right ripeness, but also with lots of flavour and those spice and florals that we love to see, and red fruit characters. And I think that's a real shining, that's the real style that we love, and that's a style that comes naturally to Block 2 here at Balhannah.
The other interesting thing is that hand harvest is a relatively uncommon practice in Australia, full stop, but less common with red grapes, and even less common with Shiraz. And in our case, it's absolutely fundamental to our practices, isn't it? Because if you don't hand harvest, then you can't have whole bunch, and we use a fair bit of, maybe you can talk to that in a minute, we use a fair bit of whole bunch, we use whole berries, you know. So without those things, then it's very hard to achieve a prolonged fermentation, which is about complexity and all of those things. So
yeah, I agree. And you know, one of our theories and our principles is that if you're going to grow amazing grapes, then you need to make that commitment to putting those amazing grapes into a fermenter and getting the most you can out of it. So we feel like the cost of going, the trouble of going to hand pick this fruit, and then looking at each bunch as it goes across the table and deciding what's going to go in is probably the most crucial step. And from there, we feel like with Shiraz in particular from our side, it sort of lends itself. It loves whole bunch, so we kind of include 70 to 80% whole fruit into these ferments, and I think that does a couple of things. One, it opens the tannin pool. It provides structure. It provides tannin. It provides longevity. The wines are built for the long run, and but they also have, the natural feeling of Shiraz is opulence, and it has the structure to support that opulence. And I think for us, that's been a really critical part of the style and a critical part of the Balhannah Shiraz.
And again, a very uncommon practice in Australia. Not that uncommon in Northern Rhone, but pretty uncommon here. And I think that it does, if you're talking about layers of complexity, those practices are really important. And for any of you who don't understand what we're saying, it's kind of the whole bunch thing is literally that. We don't pump the grapes, we don't destem the grapes. They go from the sorting table straight into the open fermenter, and then they might take 10 days to start fermenting. That's giving you a sort of intracellular fermentation, adding complexity, and then because they break down slowly, you get a very long, slow ferment, which again builds colour, complexity, detail, exactly. So we're really excited by the style, and I think that cool climate Shiraz, be it from the Adelaide Hills, be it from producers like Tonakilla in Canberra, it's a really food-friendly style of wine. They do age very well, and I think whilst there's plenty of room for multiple Shiraz styles, for me, it's a style that's really food friendly, and I love.
Yeah, I think it is. For me, it's the style that really suits our place, and I think for us, we're not trying to make big Barossa like Shiraz from the Adelaide Hills. We're trying to make Adelaide Hills wines, and we're trying to make, even more importantly, single vineyards to represent, the best example of themselves. And for us, this style, the spice, the tannin, the structure, it's really a wonderful thing, and that's certainly a site that we've loved, and it's probably the one we're most confident of first up, and I think that's been really rewarded. And it does have a wonderful season. It ripens later. It gets the best of the season. It's often when we're talking about at the end of the season, what had the best growing season, and Shiraz is often in that.
Yeah. So talking about aging, Adam, we've got the 13, which was the first vintage there.
Yep.
And a question from Jared, I think. Was it Jared? I'm not sure.
Next one down.
About single vineyards and aging potential. How long do you recommend cellaring the Shiraz? Well, the 13 is still a pup. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can be very confident on is particularly, with us, with these wines in mind, is longevity. And I think probably, Chardonnay is interesting because I do think it has such longevity, but Shiraz is naturally going to have a lot of longevity, partially because it's set up really balanced going into bottle, but also because of the tannin and the inclusion of whole fruit and stems, and that opens the tannin pool and gives you this longevity. And so, comfortable at 10 years, comfortable at 15, comfortable at 20, but it really, for me, that's quite a personal question, and you probably want to consider how you like your wines. And for me, probably the ideal is to open a bottle, every couple of years and see how it's drinking. And
so you need a couple of cases in your cellar, a couple of dozen in your cellar.
Yeah.
There was another question about wetter years like 17 and 20. Potentially 21, please, Jared. No.
Jared's already calling the vintage. I like it.
Influence the whole bunch percentage.
No, it is a good question. And one thing we will say is that we're not wedded to practices. Like we're not 100% whole bunch every year, no matter what. And one of those things that we have changed is that level of whole bunch. And I think the 17 that you're looking at, which is that cool year, we did have to we did moderate the amount of whole bunch. So there's actually around 50% whole bunch in the 17, whereas there's more like 70-80% in the 13.
I think those cool years where you get more natural
spice
you probably don't want to exacerbate that with too much whole bunch. Jared, for your information, you're probably following the La Nina predictions, and I've read recently that they're saying the last time we had a cycle like this was 2011, which happened to be the last year that we made no Shiraz, because no Shiraz, no Pinot, because of the wet growing season. Fingers crossed that that's not repeated in 21.
Yes. I tend to love those cooler years though, because I do think that you get that extended time on the vine, and as long as you've got your farming right and you don't have the disaster of 11, I think cooler years like 17 can really show you some detail in the wines that we make.
Well, if I recall correctly, 11, which was a horror year right through southeastern Australia, was also the year that you made the Jimmy Watson at best. So it goes to show that if you have the facilities, and that's hand harvest, sorting, as well as the right attitude, you can do good things in tough years.
Yeah, I think we've always talked about that, and every year there's always a challenge, and I'm sure there'll be another challenge, and we don't want too many like 2020 actually. We probably prefer something from a different book, but
it's hard to run away from.
But I do think, I'm sure there'll be challenges. But at the moment, as far as the season sits, we're in wonderful shape. The vineyards, all the dams are full. The profiles are wet. The vines are starting to grow. We've had a couple of warm days, so we're excited about what's to come.
Excellent. Well, I think that was a pretty interesting chat. Pretty interesting group of wines.
There is one little announcement that we need to make before we go.
Okay.
There is a gift bottle of the Single Vineyard wine tonight for one lucky viewer, and that lucky viewer tonight is Stuart Cameron. So Stuart, you need to nominate what wine you would like: the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, or the Balhannah Shiraz. So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining Martin and myself, and hopefully you get a chance to try the Single Vineyards. And anything from you, Martin?
Farewell. Drink well. Bye.